Good morning and welcome all. I am Rebecca Friedman and I'm the founding director of the Wolfsonian Public Humanities Lab at Florida International University. Welcome on this November 3rd, 2020 to today's installment of season 3 of Coffee and Conversations, discussing contemporary issues with Miami Book Fair. With the election upon us, boarded up storefronts around the country in preparation for what might come, friends and colleagues at the polls doing their part, racism continuing to rage, and the coronavirus part of our everyday vocabulary, today's conversation seems particularly vital. So thank you for tuning in. We first began Coffee and Conversations at the start of the coronavirus pandemic and quarantine a lifetime ago. We talked with a host of directors of cultural institutions around the country. It seemed to us that the responsibility and power of cultural institutions had and has never been more poignant. So then we turned to the long-standing pandemic of racism and anti-Blackness in this country in season 2, Cultural Institutions and Histories of Anti-Blackness. Today we continue to engage in conversations about arts and culture in this moment. In season 3, a collaboration with Miami Book Fair. This collaboration involves several of the most well-known thinkers living and writing today, all of whom will be participating in the 37th Miami Book Fair between November 15th and 22nd, 2020. To top it off, today we have a wonderful guest, Christian Staebler, author of newly released Redbone, the true story of a Native American rock band. Christian is a graphic designer and illustrator working as a freelancer since 1991. He does layouts for books, magazines, industrial booklets, packagings. He's also illustrator for publishers like Hachate and Nathan. In his personal works, what comes always first is nature. This latest work, Redbone, created in cooperation with the Vega family, authors Christian Staebler and Sonia Paoloni, and artists, excuse my pronunciation, Tybalt Balahi, take painstaking steps to ensure the historical accuracy of this important and often overlooked story of America's past. Part biography, part research journalism, Redbone provides a voice to a people long neglected in American history. So it seems that this day in particular to talk to this wonderful author makes a whole lot of sense. And saying that we are honored to have him is an understatement. He's joined by our wonderful colleague, David Rifkind, who is among our WPHL faculty fellows, an associate professor in the Department of Architecture at FIU. Just very briefly, our format is simple. Our two guests will have a conversation for 20 minutes or so, and then we will take questions for the remaining 10 from the audience. So at any time, please feel free to submit a question using the Q&A chat button at the bottom of the screen. So now I turn it over to David. Thank you both for being here.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. And before I turn to Christian, I want to acknowledge that we here at FIU live and work in the traditional territory of the Taino, Tequesta, and Seminole nations. Well, it is a real honor to be able to speak with Christian Staebler. Christian, we just wanted to ask you about your book and about how you became interested in Redbone in the first place. I mean, what was the genesis of this book?
First, thank you for inviting me. It's a big honor for me to be here, and I didn't expect it, so it's great to be amongst you, especially on a day like today. Yeah. Yes, the book, the origin of the book comes far away because I've always listened to music, but as an art student back in 50 years ago, I think, something like that. Yeah, almost 45. A teacher of mine, because he asked us to draw instrument music, and I was interested in playing bass at the time, and he gave me the first album of Redbone, and I fell in love with this music because it was unique, and so from then on I tried to search what they did, how many albums they produced, but it wasn't easy in the 70s in France because they only could only find at the end of the 70s, you can only find the I don't know how you say that, 45 little formats, vinyls, but the big albums, you didn't find them in France. So I had to wait until the internet came in the 90s. And so the 90s, I started to search information about the band. And I didn't find much on the net at that time. So I figured out in 2004, I think, I thought, well, nobody did it, so why not do it myself? And I created a website for the band. So it started from there. And a few years later, I was in connection with Dutch fans because they had big hits in Redbone was very famous in Holland, especially in Holland, yeah. All Europe, but Holland was really a country where they had many hits. So some fans contacted me and gave me informations, and I learned that Piet de Poor, the drummer of the band, was living in Holland at that time. So I went to see him, and that was the first interview I did for the band. And afterwards, he told me lots of really fun anecdotes, rock and roll anecdotes from concerts, and it was really fun to listen to him. He's a great storyteller, and it was really interesting. And I put some of these stories on the website. But I did, and he asked me why we should do a book, and I thought, yeah, but it's just to tell stories about rock and roll concerts. It didn't appeal to me, and it wasn't enough. And then a few years later, Pat Vegas, the singer and bass player of the band, took contact with me because it was the only site that was talking about them, and it became their official site, in fact. So he contacted me, and he told me about Pete's childhood and his childhood, and I thought, yeah, that's something more interesting than just rock and roll anecdotes. And from then on, I started thinking about doing a graphic novel. Why a graphic novel? Because I'm interested in comics and graphic novel. I'm writing in journals, in magazines about comics, and so for me it was the logical thing to do a graphic novel. And we started searching a publisher, and I worked with a friend first, and it didn't work out. He wasn't enough interested in the book, and we found Thibaut Balahi, and from then on, we constructed the story and found the publisher and did the book. That's the story of the book.
Well, I think there's more, because this is also a collaborative work. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that too, that this is a project that you did together. You co-author it, you also, and also we should point out that you are a professional graphic artist, but you did not illustrate the book. So if you could talk a bit about that, especially about how the visual art becomes part of the storytelling.
Yeah, I had the chance to live with Sonia Paoloni, and she is much more able to write good dialogues. I constructed the story, and we discussed, and she changed a few, how do you say, connections between scenes, because she thought it wasn't enough fluent. Is that the right word?
Right.
Yeah, and she rewrite everything. All the dialogues, she rewrite them to make them more natural, and she was a big part of it. I think the quality of the writing is 90% from her. I was just here to figure it out and do the research, the interviews, and construct the basic lines. But she was really the writer of it. And Thibaut did a wonderful work, because I did sketches and to how do you say, panels to describe what I wanted in each page. But he just, I did it for the 10 first pages, and he sent back what he had in mind, and it was just, I couldn't think better. So I let him, afterwards I let him his choice, and I just described the page, and he was drawing everything, and he had such a beautiful artistic sensitivity. I had nothing to add, so we let him do his work we didn't interfere very much in what he did as a drawer.
And were there parts too where the illustrations that Thibaut sent to you, that did those transform the way that you and Sonia were writing the dialogue? So did the imagery, did it affect the text?
Not really, no, not really, because we were in advance of the text, of course, because we sent him the text and he was drawing afterwards. But it just matched everything we had in mind without telling him too much. He was just figure it out. Yeah, he had the imagination that was just in connection with us. That was really great.
Yeah. And I'm wondering too, because you described the process of listening to the band members talk about their experiences, both their experiences together in the band with the concerts and touring, but also their experiences of childhood. And those are integrated into the book. And the book has this quality. It's structured as a series of stories being told by one person to another, by a parent to a child, and by band member to band member. And it's absolutely fascinating as a structure. Could you talk more about how you got to that kind of, the way that the book became about basically an oral storytelling?
The thing is, I wanted to mix the story of the band with the story of American, how do you say, Native Americans. And so it was important to be able to switch from one part to the other. So I first thought, the first thinking I had was if to make Pat, the narrator, talk with his girl. So this was from the beginning. I had this idea, and then we tried to put everything together in a. I first wanted to start with Wounded Knee, but it was too. I think it was the climax, and start with the climax was not a good idea. So we switched that to the middle, and started to have something very chronological. Yeah, is that right? Yeah. And so we started with the beginning of Pat and Lolly, and how they figured out to create the band just as with American natives, and the influence of Jimi Hendrix, and that's the very chronological. And then I thought to have something more personal. I finished with the very beginning, with the childhood of Pat and Lolly, because Lolly died in 2010, and Pat and his daughter go to his grave, and that's how I finished the story.
Yeah, it's really powerful, the way that brings the story full circle. And it's also really interesting the way that you weave in these episodes in American history that are frankly not well known among Americans. Both the original massacre at Wounded Knee and then the occupation at Wounded Knee, the emergence of the American Indian movement, and these other kinds of really important civil rights episodes in American history. These all get woven into your story. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that as well, because we should also point out that you're observing this as a person who probably did not grow up with these stories, certainly not in the way that somebody born in the US did. I mean, you come from Alsace. I mean, it's just a different world. And so what was that like too for you, sort of excavating this aspect of American history and learning about it?
Yeah, I think Wounded Knee was famous, maybe more famous. The events from 1973 were maybe more known in Europe than in USA. I don't know, because it was famous for me. So and the song, maybe it's Redbone's song, "We Are All Wounded at Wounded Knee," maybe that had an influence because it was really a big hit in Europe. So that's maybe a reason. But talking about the boarding schools, for example, I wanted, it's Pat, the singer, who told me about these boarding schools first. And he told me Pete was in it and was taken to a boarding school when he was a child. And I tried to make Pete talk about it, but he was really not wanted to. He just told me he was at Chemawa boarding school, and that it was really the hell for him. But that's almost everything he told me. He didn't want to talk about it. It was too painful for him. So
Yeah.
I did research, and that's why the book takes some more documentary parts, because he didn't tell me himself. So I thought it's Pat who will talk about it, and Thibaut and I thought to have a different drawing style to really switch the two
Yes.
the two things. So
Yeah,
there is 3 or 4
for those who don't have
parts.
the book yet, the color of the pages changes, the graphic style changes, and it becomes this, you can feel the pain of that kind of story that's being told there. You also include a bibliography too, which is terrific for people who want to continue to do more research.
Yeah. I think the 2 main things are the books by the IM, American Indian Movement leaders. I think the one by Dennis Banks is really a great book. I think it's called Objiwa Warrior. It's really a nice autobiography. And the Russell Means one is really great too. He was famous, I think, in the US. He played in movies, and he's really an interesting guy to dig into what he did and what he wrote. And yeah, a really great thinker, I think. Yeah, he's really interesting. And talking about what happens to the Native Americans, I think Joe Sacco just put out a graphic novel about, it's called Paying the Land in English. I have it here in French, I can show it. And so this is a book that talks about what's happening to Native Americans in the Northwest territories from Canada. It's really great. He did a lot of interviews. It's really interesting.
Thank you for sharing that. I was thinking more about too some of the interrelationships between national and global politics, and the specific story of the band that you bring up in the book are things that I don't think we would have known without your sort of recording of this testimony of the band members, are things like the way that their record label, Epic, was concerned about the level of activism in their work. In fact, they didn't want them to record "We Were All Wounded" at Wounded Knee, as you point out in the book. And that it only happened because they went to Europe, where they were better able to, they were welcome to tell this story, to record it, to promote at first the single, which then became part of that next album. But yeah, this is really interesting. The kind of history that you're excavating through the testimony of the band members. And I was wondering, what were some of the things that really surprised you about what they told you about their experiences?
Yeah, I think Pat told me lots of really interesting anecdotes, but this one was was amazing, because his Epic didn't want to put this song out in the States, and he decided to press 500 copies and take them with him and with the band and distribute them in Europe. That's just a silly idea when you think about it. And it worked, because he gave it to all the radios who did interviews before the concerts, and the Epic Europe, the company in Europe, had no other choice than to put the record out and press it and distribute it in Europe, although it didn't come out in the States at that time. So it came out in June, while the events in Wounded Knee were just finished, and it came out in Europe, and it was a big hit in everywhere. Number one in the.
This is all playing out against the backdrop of the very long occupation of Wounded Knee by activists.
The occupation started in February, I think, 1973, and finished in start of June, I think, something like that, or end of May. And there were two natives who were killed by the FBI, and the 2 leaders had to get away. It was really it's a strange story if you read it. I think if you read it in Dennis Banks' book, it's really amazing.
Yeah.
And the record company not wanting to put it out in the States was something it's in a way it's logical, because standing for a riot in Dakota was not something they wanted to accept.
I mean, it strikes, oh, if I may, it strikes me that, I mean, all of it is a history that's so terribly unknown, right, in our country. And certainly, you know, I was thinking about this book and the questions of audience, who, like, for whom is this book, and how vital and important it would be if we had young people reading this book. I mean, especially given the format that it's in and all of that, that it would be a kind of accessible and, I think, intriguing way for young people to begin to understand all of this history, which is so not taught, you know, across our country. And that's why I was thinking it was so fortuitous to have this conversation today, right? Because in a way it all begins with the kind of question of education and lack of knowledge and so forth and so on. So I wonder if you have a sense, Christian, about, you know, potential audiences. And then speaking of audience, then we'll turn to the audience questions before our time runs out.
I have no, I didn't do the book thinking about a specific audience. I did it just, I did it for the band first, because I think they deserve to have a testimony about them. And that's the main thing why I did it. Because I love their music, and I really a constructed friendship with Pat and with Pete. So these are really two great guys, and I'm really happy to have been able to do this book for them. And but I didn't think about who is going to read it, especially not in France. There's lots of people reading comics in France. It's more than, I think it's more common here and than in the US. In the US, in USA, you think comics, it's just superheroes, but it's not as usual to read comics at any age. In France, it's everybody reads comics, because there's lots of graphic novels too, and more interesting. Everything can be treated through graphic novels, actually.
No, of course, of course. So let me, if okay, turn to a question that we have from our audience, from Sonia Melamed. She asks, your book is very cinematic. It reads like a screenplay. Are there any plans to adapt it to the screen?
If anybody's interested, let us know. I think it would be great, but I have no idea for the moment. No connection with that. No. Although I think 3 persons made a mail to us, but nothing came out for the moment. So the book just came out in the States, so I think we have to wait for that.
Next. Well, what is next for you? Do you have a next project on your agenda?
Yes, I am writing a story of comics, in fact, all over the world, and it's in 3 books. The first 2 came out in France. I think that they won't be able to be translated in the States, because it's typical French comics and story of comics, and the influences between continents, Japan with Europe with America, and so it's really an interconnection. And I'm working on the third one, who will come out next year. And then for the other project I'm working on is a restoration of a French classic comic too, and all the original panels are lost, so we have to colorize everything, and it's a big work, but it's really fun to do.
Wonderful. It's wonderful. We're almost out of time, so I don't know if there's anything you would like to add, Christian, or David, if you have last questions before I close it out.
Nothing special, because thank you for inviting me. It was really fun to talk with you, and I appreciate you were really kind and interesting thing to do. So thank you. I hope my English was not too bad.
Your English is perfect. Thank you so much for joining us. And David, thank you so much for
Thank you.
wonderful conversation. And thanks to the audience for listening. So let me just end by saying, please join us this Thursday when we will be joined by Pinel E. Joseph, author of The Sword and the Shield, The Revolutionary Lives of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., who will be in conversation with our very own Elisa Silva, our latest public humanities faculty hire. And please also mark your calendar and join us when Walter Mosley, Ilsa Calderon, Bill Nye the Science Guy, Abby Wambach, Joy Harago, Natalie Portman, Richard Ford, and many, many other thought leaders share their new work at the 37th Miami Book Fair 2020, November 15th to 22nd. All readings, presentations, and conversations at the book fair are free. So please visit them online, miamibookfaironline.com, for more information. And with that, I thank you both so very much and have a peaceful as possible day.
Thank you. Thank you, really.
Yeah, you well.